Hello and welcome. This is the Carbon Watchdog podcast. The climate is changing and so must we, to adapt to the new normal and, of course, to do what we can to halt global warming. On today's podcast, I'm talking to Robin Nicholson, who's an architect at Cullinan Studios, a cooperative architecture practice which has been designing innovative low-energy buildings for 65 years, some of which are now listed, using design strategies such as passive solar as early as 1970. One of his first projects was building the Olivetti Training Centre in Hazelmere, and as he says, since then, every building is a story in its own right. He was a key force in the creation of EDGE, a roundtable that encourages professional institutions to work together to greater effect on public policy, setting standards like the Cross-Institutional Climate Action Plan for the construction industry and the Collaboration for Change report. So please support Carbon Watchdog on Patreon via the link on your website, on the Carbon Watchdog website, and enjoy the discussion. I'm Adam Hardy, and my guest today, Robin, is here with me now, over Zoom. Hello, Robin.
Hi.
You have massive experience in greening the built environment, but the story that you told me, which really piqued my interest and made me think that it would make good podcast material, was the work on zero carbon schools you did for the Department of Education in 2010, when Ed Balls was Education Secretary and Labour were in government in the UK. Ed Balls essentially asked you to report on what they would have to roll out so that all new schools would be zero carbon by 2016. The report is out there on the internet, and there's a link on the Carbon Watchdog website. But Labour were ousted in 2010, and Michael Gove, the incoming Tory Education Secretary, threw out the plans. 10 years later, now that the Conservative government is starting to realise they need things like this, do you think it's time to bring it back? Have you?
There's kind of two dimensions to this. One is we could go back and discuss the Zero Carbon Schools report. But the question you asked specifically is what should happen now, and the context within which we in the EDGE are promoting the idea of transforming every school to net zero and every new school to be net zero is that there is a sort of general feeling that there needs to be the economic recovery needs to be a green recovery, but most organisations are championing green domestic retrofit as the way forward. The problem about domestic retrofit is that we don't have the skills, and people live in all the homes, and the last thing they want is to be disrupted, particularly after COVID and everything else. But that's a problem. But the bigger problem is that we as an industry don't know how to design, and we certainly don't know how to build zero carbon homes. So our idea in the EDGE was that we would, if we concentrated on the schools, not only would that guarantee a spread of acquisition of skills across the country, it would be at a local scale, and all the available knowledge could be poured into this program, and everybody would learn from it, both the designers, the builders, the users, because they're important. And we could then move on. It wouldn't take very long, say 5 years to do. We could then move on to doing the domestic retrofit, which is a much bigger and much more problem.
The point that's very relevant today is the fact that the Treasury have decided to take back 95% of the funding that they'd made available for the green homes grants, because only 5% or so of the grant money had been taken up. And that was literally because the tradespeople and the engineers and the people who were meant to go and do the work were just not qualified. We're not able to. But
also, there was a problem. There was a lack of skilled. In order to deliver this program, you had to be signed up as a contractor to Trustmark, and there's only so many registered Trustmark contractors, and they're all busy as hell. up and down the country. So, and they're tiddly little projects, you know, a sort of under 10,000 project is might be a lot of money for a householder, but for a contractor is small beer. So there was little financial attraction, and this was a kind of typical piece of made up on the hoof government policy, which instantly the Treasury realised would be a disaster when it was announced, but they couldn't get out of it because a minister had announced that this was going to be the answer. Well, it clearly isn't the answer. It was another badly thought out program, which is a pity because money was there. Meanwhile, the Department of Education has done a condition survey of nearly every school in the country. It knows what needs to happen to them all, and but is, you know, can't even get the funding for 20 pilot schools to retrofit them, which is pathetic. What
are you talking there? How much would they actually need? Presumably not 1.5 billion.
I don't know is the answer to that, but it's you know, small beer. No, it's not small beer. It will vary enormously, partly because there's a huge backlog of maintenance in these schools. And I think there needs to be, I mean, we would like there to be some prototype retrofits whereby because there are different kinds of system schools. There's, you know, there's the ones that was developed in Nottinghamshire. There's one that was invented in the south of England. So there are different system schools, and then there are the one-off schools. But there are also some schools that are really, I mean, Worcestershire's got some brilliant new near zero schools. So
you mean just the buildings?
Yeah. I mean,
presumably every school has got more than one building anyway. So, well, not every school, but most.
Oh yeah, yeah. But there was some. I mean, during the noughties, there was a lot of schools got commissioned, and a lot of them were not zero, but they were near zero. They did all the right things. I can think of a secondary school this was in part of the program of Building Schools for the Future, which had some disasters as well as some great schools. There was one in
Building Schools for the Future was...
It was a government program to replace every secondary school in the country, which was slightly bonkers as a plan. But there was you know...
It sounds amazing. Every school, good grief.
Yeah.
Rebuild them or relocate?
Well, part of the problem was that, of course, they were on the existing sites. So you had to, and the schools couldn't stop working. So one of the logistical issues was where to put the new school, and then decant the existing school into it, and then make good the site of the old school. Well, of course, the existing schools were built on the best part of the site for a school. So,
right.
So there was a fundamental issue there. But that aside, there were some real successes, and I'm afraid I can't remember the name, but there was one in, I think it was Wilkinson Eyre, did a really nice school in Bristol, and there were several good ones in Bristol. Big school that did exactly what we had asked them to do in the Zero Carbon Schools report that I did, as you mentioned, back in 2010. Which
right.
The main classroom all faced north. And as a result, some of the classrooms faced south, but they're all heavily protected and shaded, nothing facing east or west. And there was a whole series of other...
Is that bad?
Sorry?
Is that bad if they face north, or does that make it easier?
No, that's really good, because you don't get any heating. So the most difficult design problem for a secondary school is ventilation, because teenagers generate a lot of heat, and actually getting the sufficient airflow
right.
is really difficult. When you add in, you know, a fully glazed west-facing classroom, and you're in real trouble because it's going to overheat whatever technology you apply. Whereas if it's facing north, you can open the window if it's hot,
right,
and large. I mean, they need variation, but the managing the ventilation and not, I mean, it's like a lot of buildings, us architects fell in love with glass, and it's taking a very long time for people to realize how most of our recent buildings are overglazed. And
Right.
Indeed, many homes are overglazed because estate agents love to sell big picture windows.
Yeah, I bet.
Well, they're catastrophic in terms of, depending on which way they're facing and how much protection there is, it's
Right.
really bad.
Okay, before you go on, the Schools for the Future program, was that under the Tory government, or is it started by the coalition?
It was under the Labour government. It was cancelled. I mean, when the Tories got in, they cancelled a whole range of really good, I mean, good and not so good programs. And Building Schools for the Future was well-intentioned. It just needed radical redesign as a program. It needed to be less all or nothing. It needed to understand how to work with the buildings that were already there,
right,
building new ones. But it's like they scrapped, the Code for Sustainable Homes, which was the most brilliant piece of regulation insofar as it set out a staged improvement for the house builders, ramping up the performance of the houses with a set timetable, set performance, which was to zero carbon homes by 2016 as well. So it was, that's what we were trying to do, and they put the whole bloody lot in the bin. As well as, I mean, we as part of our program, the Zero Carbon Schools Task Force, and the report's still available online. I mean, it's there you go.
Love it.
Oh no, I forgot what I was going to say. You can edit this.
The political situation sounds exactly like education. That my mother, who is a primary school teacher, used to complain about terribly, because she said every new government comes in, they get a new minister of education, and he wants to make his stamp on the world, or at least on the education system, and changes everything wholesale and just causes everybody untold work. Things that were working just get chucked out. Things that are new and untried get brought in, and it's change of government is a disaster for education, it seems.
Well, it's partly because we need a really good civil service, and since Margaret Thatcher's time, we've been stripping out expertise and knowledge out of the civil service and reducing their numbers to the point where it's very difficult for anyone to be able to say with authority, hang on, Minister, we've tried that back in the 20 years ago. Don't go there, do it this way. And that knowledge has gone in from the public realm, and it's catastrophic, actually.
Yeah.
In every department of government.
Yeah,
so
I know.
We need to build it back up again. And this idea that you get rid of regulations, it's complete nonsense. The Eric Pickles idea that, 2 out, 1 in order to get a new regulation, you had to get rid of 2 old ones.
Good grief.
Again, what led to catastrophes, I'm not saying it led directly, but it led to a culture that led to Grenfell and the appalling loss of life.
Yeah, we have the same situation in the NHS. A friend of mine who's a manager in the NHS says that just the levels of management have just been stripped out, causing just all the inefficiencies that they'd managed to get rid of, all just creep back in. Yeah. And it's just totally retrograde step.
Well, I don't know what we're going to do about it, but what I think we are in discussing, with discussions in the Treasury, that this would be a relatively low cost way of upskilling an industry that, after all, is at least 9% of the GDP, the construction industry.
Yeah.
Major industry that's unable to articulate its needs because it's so fragmented, but it certainly needs radical upgrade of digital design and construction, building passports, a whole gamut of what we know how to do now for net zero, but which we're not able to do.
And it's an even bigger percentage of the UK CO2 emissions comes from the housing sector. Not quite sure what exactly it is, around 25%.
Yes, but it's kind of buildings, they say it's 40, but it depends. In London, it's sometimes put as being 70%. I mean, it kind of, it depends what you include.
Yeah.
So yeah, 25% is the sort of normal figure for housing, but it's the housing that we're building now should be net zero ready, if not actually net zero. And there is
Right.
is sort of happening with the future home standards. General regulations are coming through, but the rest kind of the schools aren't happening yet.
Well, I've had problems with the well, not personally, but there are problems with the local Holloway prison site in Holloway in North London, and they seem to be don't seem to be adhering to any net zero standards that I can make out. They have all sorts of problems in there that some associates of mine in the neighborhood forum here have identified. Like they're building these very high towers where you can have we have social housing, put them in very, very high towers, which are and the higher you go, the more carbon intensive, the more CO2 emissions they produce per unit.
I'll stop you there because they've got towers,
Yeah,
very high towers. We're talking
well, not
12
20
stories, 14 stories maybe, but the bigger problem is the overshadowing of the public realm and the single aspect apartments.
Oh, I'm teaching a grandmother to suck eggs here. Sorry about that. I didn't realize that you were in the know about this one.
Oh no, this is I'm on one of the community groups.
It's public knowledge amongst architects, no doubt.
And the problem is that it's potentially a wonderful scheme that was designed for 900 homes, and they're trying to put 1,200 homes on the site. Whose decision was that? Nobody will say. It's all a bit too secretive, and we've been asking questions about performance for a year now without any answers.
Right.
And there is well, I think there's a community consultation meeting this evening, which I'm not going to be at, but there is quite a lot of expertise that's building up, but they've largely brought it on themselves by just not discussing what they were thinking of, and kept saying whenever we asked about sun path diagrams, they'd say, "Oh, we're going to do that much later." Well, there isn't an architect worth his name who hasn't done them on about day one, because
oh, I see,
a requirement. So they existed, but the community, the people in charge of the consultation process would not let on, and the architects aren't allowed out to talk about the scheme. So that suggests somebody's trying to hide something. That I have to say they have made some changes, because there were some closed courtyards which we were very critical of in terms of overshadowing.
right.
And they've got rid of them. So the scheme is, getting better, but there's all kinds of sub-rows. But the main issues are the same in more or less every housing scheme in the world, which is overheating, overshadowing, and single aspect flats.
Yeah, it's the main thing that my friend was going on about was the single aspect, which I think it means the windows of any of the apartments are only facing in one direction. That's right?
That's right. Yeah. So
and then he was saying, well, they've got to be on both sides so you can get the breeze going through when it gets too hot.
Through ventilation, and particularly now in COVID, after COVID, it's even more important that you can get through ventilation. And right. Deck access became very unpopular, but it is now the way of getting through ventilation, is you have, a gallery access, because it's quite expensive otherwise to have so many lifts and staircases, which you need if you're going to have, blocks with right. All the apartments having more than one aspect. But it's we know what technically it's all sort of there, but it's they won't discuss it.
Yeah, okay. I can I can imagine they
That's
got
a bit of a
everybody's
digression anyhow, isn't it? But
money
it's
and so
exactly
on.
the same
Yeah,
thing, which is we architects for, and it's builders, everybody wants to, they got to build a building. They want to make each elevation the same.
yeah, sure.
Well, the answer, because obviously it's cheaper and easier to build. But the point is, the performance of an elevation facing south is completely different to the performance of an elevation facing north, and similarly facing east or west. And
Right.
now that we are having to do operational whole life carbon calculations, this is all coming out because we know exactly what's required, but there are still plans being built out which are going to overheat, like most new homes in London.
What what interested me, you're talking about whole life carbon carbon accounting. I'm not sure,
Yeah.
what was the term you used? Yeah. One of the things that always annoys me is that I don't want to criticize architects or whoever it is, but I see these brick buildings getting torn down and totally replaced. And I just think there is so much carbon invested in those old buildings, and it's just being thrown away. And so a whole load more emissions are being created to put up something else rather than adapting what's there already. So
you're absolutely right. But this is only, it's taken the climate emergency to get people to realize it, because the driver for all this building in our cities, rebuilding in our cities, that is tearing down existing buildings, is land value. So
right.
if somebody looks at a building and thinks, blimey, do you know what, I could get double that amount on the site, they pay whatever it needs and tear down the building and put up a new one double the size, and by doing that the value of the land doubles or more, and right. Then the land around it doubles, so they all have to think, oh blimey, I have to realize the value of my site. So it's a kind of, it's a cumulative impact. And I have absolutely no doubt that you should not be allowed to pull down a building of over a certain size. I mean, anything over, say, 4 stories in a city or town, unless you can demonstrate a whole life carbon benefit, period. Just shouldn't be allowed to pull it down, because there is not enough material in the world to build what we need to build in sub-Saharan Africa and India and China. And we in the Western Europe have to stop tearing buildings down and make the ones we've got work much better.
Does the carbon accounting also include all of the building phase? I mean, not just the materials, but everything that's happening. Yeah. Like, okay, not exactly concrete. So concrete will be part of the materials. Okay, so what about if you have
concrete's a big issue, which is, by certainly by 2050 and probably a lot earlier, there will be no cement. So concrete is you can't make cement without generating unreasonable quantities of carbon dioxide.
Right, and that is not because of the energy put in, is it? That is because of the chemical reaction that goes in the materials that go into making cement. You see. So
people who say that they're recycling concrete buildings by crushing them up and turning them into hardcore will have to come to an end, because you've got to use, if you've got concrete, you've got to reuse it, not crush it up. But this is a huge revolution that's going to happen, and it's something that as a country we kind of know what to do as well, if not better than anyone in Europe, and it's knowledge that we can share with the rest of the world.
It's good to hear somebody being positive about Britain. We know just as well as people in Europe, if not better. I've been hearing a lot of people
from trying to persuade government to behave better.
Good point. Yeah, of course. So the bit that I was wanted to go down a little rabbit hole about was the actual building itself. When you, sorry, no, not the building of the building. So the building of your skyscraper or your block or your house. when you roll up with a ton of machines, they're all going to be operated by diesel powered diesel internal combustion engines, or driven by diesel generators, or whatever. So there's, you know, a huge amount of noise comes from these building sites, and you know, it's just an enormous amount of energy that they're using to do all this building work.
Yeah.
Is there anybody who has even thought about, like JCB, for instance, thought about a totally electric, well, crane, or actually, no, a crane is probably
I don't think there's a manufacturer in Western Europe that isn't, and China probably, that isn't trying to make electric everything's. I mean, there won't be diesel, you know, within 5 years. We've already told everybody there won't be any new gas boilers from 2025.
But okay, you believe that, and I believe that. But does the business believe that? Does the industry believe it?
Of course
not. Right.
But
I mean,
fortunately in this country we've got regulations, because we hate regulations insofar as we always want to cheat, break them. But actually, we've got regulations about climate change, and thank God we have. Because we have to change the way we do things, and you know, building sites will change. There's a bit of a problem about substituting timber because of the sort of knee-jerk reaction to the Grenfell Tower disaster was to ban combustible materials. Well, that's a bit tricky, because we need to build buildings with timber structures.
yeah. Oh, they just put one up in Berlin. I was reading. There's a big tower block has gone up. It looks like 20 stories, completely wooden, timber.
Yeah, well,
timber frame.
we've built. I've forgotten how big. I mean, there's I think the first tall one in London was down in Hackney. I mean, there's got 2 or 3 CLT buildings in Hackney, and you know, it's fine. It's a good way of making buildings, but
when you start to use all of these flammable, well, basically timber and other combustible products to build stuff, do you have to douse them in flame retardant chemicals that will then off gas for the next 5 to 10 years?
Shouldn't do. I mean, like, the timber is essentially depending on how it's used and how it's detailed and everything, by and large chars and doesn't burn. So that's what you're relying on, but it does require careful detailing.
Right, and there's obviously not very much experience of it either.
No, but I mean, there's, you know, we're going to have to learn very fast to do things differently, and we always used to talk about that, but now it's the rule. And even Boris Johnson, you know, upped the reductions of CO2.
Yeah.
That we were going, you know, the reductions in emissions. So it's a cross-party situation. There's, whatever it is, 75% of local authorities have declared net zero by varying dates between 2030 and 2050. And that's fantastic. Nobody knows how to do it, but it's just brilliant. They've made the declarations, because the first thing you have to do is to measure where the bloody energy is going, where the carbon dioxide is coming from, and what's the energy being used for.
Right.
And
so concrete's the worst one.
Sorry?
Concrete is the worst. Is that the worst offender? Am I right there?
It's pretty bad, yeah. And
glass and steel?
Well, steel's not too bad, because it's sort of largely recycled.
Oh, okay.
But we can. The big challenge is how to design buildings to be taken a bit and reused, and the bits reused if you do need to demolish them. And there are some good work being done by a guy called Duncan Baker Brown in Brighton. And he's written a book called The Reuse Atlas. And they've done, you know, that he's built a demonstration building in Brighton that were made out of entirely recycled materials, using, former student duvets for insulation, all kinds of repurposing materials. But actually,
Wow.
perfectly reasonable building that you end up with. And there are buildings, and he has examples of buildings in Paris and in Holland, which, quite big towers that are being taken down and all the bits reused. People making new buildings out of redundant old buildings. So
this is real circular economy stuff. This sounds really good.
It's tiptoeing, and it's bloody difficult and probably more expensive. But the alternative is to make use of what you've already got.
So who's doing that at the moment? Because I mean, obviously, of course, these things are going to be horrendously expensive to take down a building and recycling it. And there's nobody's going to do that unless they're doing it from the goodness of their own heart, because they see the climate crisis as what it is, rather than something to be ignored.
If it's effectively is the law, then they will have no option.
Right, but it's not the law yet, or at least not in this country.
No. But it will come.
Yeah.
I mean, there were some quite good examples of. I think it was British Land did a building in the city. I can't remember what it is, about a 10-story office block that they thought they could get a few more floors on and extend the floors. And they commissioned a study on the embodied carbon of their existing building and the one that they subsequently built, pulled down the building, rebuilt it. And all in all, they would have been better off adapting the building that in carbon terms, they'd been better off and earned the same amount of money if they adapted the existing building. And that, it's documented. It's not. But there is a sort of fantasy that you can build up, and if once you start going above 10 stories, the increased foundations, the increased loads from wind, the increased overheating and everything just goes up. My favorite story is from an engineer who told me, a timber engineer told me this, that a great guy, that the tallest building in the Middle East is El Burj Tower, the very tall one.
In Qatar or Dubai?
I think it's Dubai, but I can never remember which building it is, which country is which. For every square meter of floor area, there is a cubic meter of concrete. Most of it underground.
Wow.
So, that's clearly not a very sensible way of building a building. They might have invent, super new lifts in order to be able to accommodate the flexing of the building, because it flexes hugely. But if you want to do something difficult, you'll find an engineer to do it. And engineers love designing, solutions to difficult problems. But the difficult problem we've got at the moment is the climate's changing, and we've got to use less material and get much more out of it.
That is, they have. I say they. I'm talking about the UEA or Saudi Arabia. There's actually a complete zero carbon city that they're building there. Is it Mazda? They
designed it. That was Mazda.
Mazda. They've designed it. Are they building
designed it? And it's the original plan by Foster's was abandoned quite quickly because it was predicated on a automatic shuttle, sort of personal shuttle underground, one floor below ground level, that took you from your multi-story car park to your office or your shop or your home.
Right.
The infrastructure costs of that was huge. And then there was the minor problem. I mean, I think they made some great, sheltered spaces, sheltered by PVs, bedded in glass and things like that. But if you're in a desert, you have to clean every bloody PV, every day. So it's not exactly the most sensible use of building materials.
Yeah, those sandstorms coming in are obviously going to. I was watching a program, a David Attenborough program last night, about the Gulf, And most of the nutrients that feed the marine ecosystem are from the sandstorms. So you can imagine that solar panels, if there's enough there to feed a whole marine ecosystem, then there's certainly enough to make a solar panel dirty enough.
Look,
Don't they have robots to do that, though?
They are still building, I think, in Masdar, and they're building slightly more, not so ridiculously expensive buildings. But it doesn't matter where you are in the world. We just have to. We used to know how to live the best way according to the climate you were. In the Arctic and Antarctic, you lived in an igloo, and it worked perfectly well. In North Africa, in Ethiopia, you lived underground to a large extent. They're all quite in Sana'a and Yemen. You built wind towers everywhere. I mean, so we know how to operate passively around the world, but
right.
Unfortunately, our financial system requires air-conditioned offices wherever you live. It was just unfortunate that somebody invented air conditioning.
Yeah. When I was in Lagos in Nigeria in the summer there, it was really hot, and going around in Lagos from office outside into an air-conditioned car, back outside again, 40 degrees heat, back inside to an air-conditioned office. It basically caused my brain to start boiling, and I just couldn't handle it. Just one morning was enough, and I had to stop.
We did a university in won a competition to do a university in Singapore, in the middle of Singapore, which is on the equator. Hot and humid, and rains a lot. And we'd got the job on a kind of lower energy idea, which was of actually not of any great interest at the time, but is now. And we were able to use what we'd learned in the States, which is the traditional breezeway, which if you were in a, you know about breezeways?
No.
If you live in a sort of an area with sun and relatively low air movement, because the critical thing is, if you're hot and humid, you just need a little bit of air skin for you to feel comfortable,
right?
Or
makes sense,
less uncomfortable. And what they all did in the old days, in which we've used this huge new university, was to introduce breezeways, where if you have passages through, I mean, usable spaces, but with bits of the building that have no external elevation on either side,
right?
As the elevation facing the sun heats up, it naturally heats the adjacent air, which rises and pulls the air through the building from the cooler side through your breezeway. It's
okay. That's smart.
But it's all, that's what everybody did in the tropics, always did. We, of course, thanks to air conditioning, we have quietly forgotten about it. And they were quite surprised when they built it and said, oh yeah, they really do work. So in Singapore, nobody sits outside. You think, as a European, you think, oh, that's wonderful landscape, fantastic, it's going to sit in it. And they don't sit outside because it's hot as hell.
Right.
Got creepy crawlies. Well, in our universities, they sit outside the air-conditioned, usually inside the building, but outside the air-conditioned envelope, because it is air-conditioned, more than we wanted, completely happy because of the air movement. And they even sit outside in the landscape where we've designed nice places for them to sit.
Great stuff.
And it just is, they love it to bits. I mean, but it's quite unlike anything else in Singapore.
I'm going to have to get a picture of that and put it on the, I'll have a little web page pointing to the podcast, and I'll put some pictures up there. I wanted to get one of the Olivetti training centre as well.
The thing about the Olivetti building is it's not really, that's not environmentally, and it has no particular.
Well, it's pretty.
Yeah, but it was pretty. It's slightly less pretty now because it's making buildings out of fiberglass is not a very clever thing to do. It's not. I mean, it is. The building is 50 years old. So under the circumstances, it's pretty good. But the problem is the thermal expansion of fiberglass is significant. So if you're trying to make sensible joints, it's very difficult. It's like, so it's like lots of metal buildings. They grow daily, and it makes they tick. The buildings tick.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
So that was, I mean, look, it's very much of its period. I mean, it's a kind of classic 70s Italian design, but that was not with that was with an architect called James Sterling. So it was before I joined Cullinans.
Okay, I've just got a couple of points to go back to the schools thing again.
Yeah.
You were talking about the well, with Ed Balls and the future schools thing, you're talking about rebuilding, but the retrofit and the changing everything to zero carbon is obviously not going to happen with all of this, with every school that you have to change. I mean, the one where my kids go to school is an old Victorian, massive, great big brick building, so you're not going to rebuild that. So you mentioned earlier, previously you mentioned you were talking about a Walton-on-Thames school where they handed over the energy management or power management to the kids in the school, and I'm afraid I wasn't able to find anything on the net because I wanted to check it out, and it's obviously there are way too many schools in Walton-on-Thames, or there are actually quite a few Walton-on-Thameses, or at least Waltons. Have you got?
It's called Ashley.
Ashley School.
Ashley Church of England Primary School.
Right. Okay.
Walton-on-Thames, and it was where the head teacher had been to the Antarctic, had an epiphany, came back, persuaded everyone that he should try and do something. This was a perfectly normal Victorian village school, just like a smaller version of the one that your children go to.
Okay.
And so his idea was to put the children in charge of the electricity, and that if he could get, and gave them a meter in the entrance hall so they could monitor it very carefully where the energy was going, and gave them every time they could get the emissions below 100 kilowatt hours a day for a week, they got 10 quid in the kitty. And each class had a monitor, an energy monitor, actually 2 energy monitors. And at the Friday assembly, which is the only one that he took, they all had to report on their energy performance for the week. And they did, one of the things obviously he had to do was to change all the computers to much smaller, the right size rather than the oversize computers that they had before.
Right, okay.
And so in the first year, they got the emissions down by 50%. After 3 years, it was down by 80%. And this was impressive in itself, but more important was that the kids took it home. So he was amazed to discover after 18 months that the parents, not all, right, of course, some of them had set up their own club, which was where they competed on 100 kilowatt hours a week. And if they could get it below that, they could join the club.
Brilliant.
It's and this is why the schools were so important, because not only did the kids get to, they can do their maths, they can do their geography, they can do their history through energy and monitoring it, but they take it home to their parents and teach them, since
Exactly.
going to learn. So
Yeah,
that
to get to the
I
parents
was
through their
so
children.
angry about. So we had set up a program whereby every school in the country that wanted a display meter would have one, and
Yeah.
a contract was let to British Gas, I think it was, to install them. And there were, I forget how many, I think something like nearly 2,000 were installed before Mr. Gove cancelled the program, along with everything else.
Right. He's not very popular in your house then. No.
Well, I just think we're now talking about, doing zero carbon schools.
Well, that is
After
so.
12 years. And it's not just us.
No.
This is a brilliant school pupils organization, a students organization called Teach the Future. And ages range from, I think the youngest active member is 9, and the oldest is, I think you can't be beyond 26. They are fantastically articulate. They organize meetings, they write draft bills. They want every school in the country to be zero carbon, and they want it to be an integral part of every subject they're taught in school, which is
Brilliant.
doing it, demanding this. It's supported by the Ashton Foundation, which is a kind of low energy charity, who have a program called Zero 2030, which is they reckon that they're going to get they want all the schools converted by 2030, which is probably a reasonable.
Was that the same name as the school? Is that just a complete coincidence?
I think it's complete coincidence, yes. I think, God, now you've got me wondering about whether it's, I'm pretty certain they're both.
The Ashton Foundation, I think I've heard of them as well, actually.
They're a well-known charity. They have an award, and the school won the award. I could check. Have you got? Is that you can't see what's on my screen? Can you now? You can only see me. So
you can share it.
No, I don't need to share it. I just need to look up the name of the school.
Right.
But it's where are we? Exemplars. So it's Ashley.
Oh, sorry.
Ashley Primary is the school. Ashden is the charity.
So as a Teach the Future, are they using Ashley Primary as an example of how it can go?
No, I think they're scattered all over the country. I think there are different groups in the 4 nations. Right. I don't think I've no idea where they draw their membership from, but one of our Edge people is on there. They have a sort of committee of old elders that help them with connections and how to do stuff.
Right. Okay.
So we're helping them, supporting them, and we ran a workshop on what was a zero carbon school for them. So because they needed to know more, and that was pretty interesting too.
Right. So basically, they were coming to you for advice on exactly what they should do, and they're pushing forward. Presumably, they're pushing the government as well. They'll be on to the Department of Education.
Because they're kids, they get really good access to their to MP, which is what you want. much more effective than you or I.
Yeah, exactly. Not quite so easy to ignore, because they make good headlines if they say that they've been ignored by whoever. No, that's really good stuff. Glad you mentioned that, because I'd completely missed that in my notes when we were talking.
That's all right.
But the thing about it going out, spreading out from the schools again via the pupils, that's sort of a parallel to the same thing about the skills being used to make schools zero carbon can then be spread out into the local community, into the local tradespeople and skilled workers and so on. I mean, I don't
think we should underestimate how difficult this is going to be, but if we do it, we're stuffed.
Well, I was going to say, trying to get a school to do anything. I've been banging on the teachers in my kids' school for ages, and it's only once in every while that they actually pick up and run with something that I suggest.
Yeah,
Because they are just totally overworked and understaffed.
of course. Underfunded, yeah. And you know, and a lot of the, I mean, there were huge in the Building Schools for the Future program. There were a huge number of low energy systems were put in. The worst were the timber timber boilers that were put in, wood chip boilers.
Oh, the biomass, right? Okay.
Biomass boilers, which most of which have never been switched on because the caretaker didn't know how to do it, and they all had backup boilers. So you have to, if you're going to do one of these things, you mustn't have the backup, because then that's what that allows the janitor to do what he's always done, and which is human nature. We all want to do what we know how to do.
Yeah.
Something difficult.
I don't want to be down on janitors or caretakers, but my experience is, and again, I had an old mate of mine from college was very radical and didn't want to have anything to do with capitalist society. And so, to the chagrin of his parents, who wanted him to be a journalist or something, he took his first class honours in English and became a caretaker. And the reason why he said he enjoyed the job so much was because he said he didn't have to do anything. He could just put his feet up and read all day.
Well, I mean, I think they are usually the salt of the earth. They do an incredible amount of stuff for the community as well as their job. So I wouldn't underestimate them. But they
No,
when it comes to, I mean, engineers tend to design overcomplicated controls. So, you know, there's a wonderful story, you know, whole litany of clever devices and switches that not only can you not find, but you haven't a clue what they mean. When, you know, even if you're an engineer, you don't know how to operate them. I mean,
yeah.
I've got a wonderful PowerPoint that a friend made of all about controls. It's just, so controls have to be really simple.
Sure.
So that anyone can operate them, and the key test should really be that the children can operate them.
Yeah, that's just the obvious parallel is with software on your telephone. You get these apps that you download, and the ones where the user interface design is spot on will go viral, and everybody will download it, and it'll be mega successful. And the ones that are just clunky and difficult to operate because they didn't do their user interface design properly will just disappear. Well, nobody will ever download. Nobody will ever bother using them. Obviously, with smartphones and apps and software for smartphones, this turnover cycle of new versions coming out is, well, you know, every couple of months if you want. Whereas with buildings and with machinery, I can imagine that the life cycle, the turnover cycle is a lot longer than that. And yeah,
is
difficult problem.
And it's I mean, there's, you know, there's very well documented research by a building materials scientist, Bill Bordas, in terms of talking about the performance gap, and he's part of the Edge. I show a picture of a building in Birmingham that the developer asked. It had been relatively recently fitted out for the Department of Energy, as was into. And he just went and checked out all the systems and the settings. And I forget the exact figures, but it went from something like 176 kilowatt hours per square meter per year to 16. And the reason he managed to do that was because the air conditioning was on at the heating was on at the same time as the cooling, 24/7. So it was just all the year round. So it's a waste of systems. Doesn't matter about the particular examples or numbers.
Right.
Waste of heat and energy for cooling is spectacular, and needs to stop.
Right. So it needs to be obvious. I mean,
Yeah.
the classic thing to say is, oh yeah, well, need to make somebody actually feel the pain when they screw it up like that. I'm not quite sure how to do that.
Who's responsible? Whose fault is it?
Yeah.
It's partly over design. It's over design is a big bugbear in terms of. I was hearing yesterday, because most boilers are oversized. The heating engineers tend to want to think of a number and then make it a bit bigger. People are oversizing heat pumps on exactly the same basis, and that's not a very clever thing to do.
Oh.
So I mean,
But they're oversizing it because surely going the wrong way.
They think
undersizing it.
Sorry?
Undersizing it is presumably the bigger problem beforehand. Well, traditionally, they would have said, well, we do not want to put in something that's not good enough, not big enough.
Yeah.
So they oversize it. And
but oversized, you want the heat pump to work at maximum efficiency. There is a problem with heat pumps about the coefficient of efficiency.
Right.
So, anyhow.
Right. Well,
how are we doing?
I just got pinged by my telephone saying that it's hit an hour more or less. So there's so much to talk about. This could go on for ages, but podcast listeners generally only want about an hour before they start having to break it
listen
down.
To all of that.
Well, I can go in and I never have actually bothered going in and taking out anything, because generally speaking, when you disrupt the flow by editing it, well, you've got to be quite good at editing, and that's not one of the skills that I've mastered quite yet. So I tend to leave it in place I think the people who are going to listen to it are listening to it in a situation where they're not under much time pressure anyway, so they don't really get too fussed about it. But yeah, Robin, it's been great talking to you. And this stuff about schools is really interesting. And I love this Teach the Future idea. And I'm going to go off and find out more about them now. So,
okay. So what do I do now? Stop recording?
Yes, thank you very much. So, well, thank you very much for being on the podcast. And yep, you can stop recording now. My name is Adam Hardy, and this is the Carbon Watchdog podcast. All of the website content and the podcasts are free. If you like what Carbon Watchdog is doing, then please head over to patreon.com using the link on the website and support me there. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you'll tune into the next one. Bye.